Cops, have you written tickets to other cops? What happened during and after? Policed in a smaller town. 20,000 pop. For 8 years. I was a military transplant. Didn't know anyone locally when I was hired. Lots of good old boys and friends of friends that could get away with almost anything. Had a city councilwoman who believed no parking signs on her street didn't pertain to her. One particular shift about 2 AM. Out of sheer frustration I guess, I found her truck parked in the street and decided to wake her and politely ask her to move it. Thank God for body cameras. Next morning at 9 AM I was awoken by a phone call from my superior that a formal complaint had been filed for vulgar language and intimidation by said councilwoman. Again, thank God for body cameras. My father had to arrest a retired NYPD officer for a DWI in NC. It was interesting to say the least. He was a dong. Acted like my father was disrespecting the badge by arresting another officer. I always had a thing against drunk drivers when I was a policeman. Found out pretty quick that cops made up a high percentage of offenders. Late 1970s, and I was pretty quickly ostracized after locking a few of them up. My cousin died because of a drunk driver. Thanks for trying at least. A friend's father was the commander of the local state police post. He lived by a railroad track that had been out of use for several decades, yet there was still a stop sign at the crossing by his house. Everyone knew this sign was obsolete and no one stopped for it. He was pulled over by a local town police officer and issued a ticket for running the stop sign. Officer told my friend's father, "Just because you are a state patrolman doesn't give you the right to run this stop sign." A couple days later, friend's father was going to lunch in his state cruiser and the town officer speeds by him in his town cruiser. State trooper pulls him over and gives him a speeding ticket. Friend's father tells him just because you are a town cop and driving a police car doesn't give you the right to speed and break the law when you are not responding to a call. I say obsolete signage should be grounds for ticket dismissal. Yes, nothing scandalous or anything. It was something basic that I would not typically ticket for. I think failing to stop when entering a public road from a business or something. Anyway, the individual immediately pulled out some out-of-state law enforcement instead of his license. I had to awkwardly tell him to provide the license, insurance, registration, and he went on about his years of service in whatever state. The rest of the stop went as usual. Once I could get him to provide the documentation, I ran his information and served him a citation. It drives me crazy when people try and pull the Leo card. Just be cool. He must have pleaded guilty and paid it, though, because I had no further involvement. A police officer came into the Home Depot I work at and tried to return a weed whacker because it didn't work. He was in uniform still. We explained that because he didn't have a receipt and b, the particular model he was trying to return was pretty old that we don't even sell it anymore, and haven't for a while, that it couldn't be returned. He basically said that he was a cop and that we were committing a crime for selling him a faulty weed whacker. He then proceeded to walk over to the garden center, pick up a brand new weed whacker and walk out the door with it. This is theft. Police were called and we all watched a police officer get arrested. Crazy crap. Not me, but my pastor was the police chaplain in our town. He wrote a sheriff's deputy a ticket for parking his cruiser in a no parking zone. It was either a school zone or a fire hydrant, and it wasn't for police business, so he couldn't argue out of it. Shitstorm from the deputy about he's a cop and you can't ticket cops. About 3 weeks later, my youth group, Lio, has a trip to go bowling in a city the next county over. While douchebag deputy decides to pull a U-turn through the grass median and pull over my pastor with a bunch of us high schoolers. Pulls our pastor out and walks him back to his cruiser to give him a ticket for speeding. THB, I'm not sure if pastor wasn't speeding. Pastor comes back and said he got a speeding ticket and wonders what the deputy is doing in the next county over. And not like a stone's throw from the line. We're talking miles over the line where he shouldn't be. My town had recently had a big stink about our local cops not being where they should be. So that the sheriff's office was doing that too riled some folks. Reminds me of that scene in Porky's where the corrupt cops messed with the high schooler's car and issued him a ticket. Only for the cop in the county the high schooler lives in to stick it to Porky and his cronies after they crossed back the county line. My father is a cop. He once pulled over his superior for drunk driving. His boss expected special treatment. My dad arrested him. He ended up leaving the department because he was warned, if you don't have our backs, then don't expect us to have yours. Not me, but my old criminal justice teacher, who used to be a cop, once told us a story about how he got pulled over by a cop from a different city, but still the same county. He tried telling him he was a cop and showed his badge, but the cop wasn't having it. He got so annoyed he got out of his car and walked up the cop writing the ticket and started mouthing off to him, which definitely didn't help. The next couple of months, my teacher's city and the other cop's city got into a ticket war and would write each other tickets if they saw that they were a cop from one of the two cities. So basically they got into a police ticket war. My boyfriend arrested a lady who worked for the county and she was drunk off of her mind. She was driving along the railroad tracks and swerving between lanes over the speed limit. Then she proceeded to use the "I know how this works and I know how to get out of trouble" speech. She was arrested for a DUI and fired from her job. I worked as a tribal officer for 25 plus years and I had issued tickets to other officers, correctional officers and politicians. It didn't matter to me who that person was that I had arrested. I also arrested other cops and ordered my own brother to be arrested. I wasn't the primary officer or on scene. The responding officers was trying to be helpful by letting me know so I could take him home. I was a sergeant at the time and never gave breaks to officers or family members. Nothing ever happened to me. I was threatened but nothing ever came from it. Speaking as a chief of police was different. When I was being interviewed I told the tribal council, who did the hiring for the chief position, that I don't play politics. I did my job and got things done. 14 months later, I was allied and told that the tribal council was talking about me, and by the time I get there I was removed. My appeals process was never followed either. Thank you. You're what a Leo should be, upholding the law. Not me, but my dad, 29 years CHP, once pulled over a dispatcher for something like expired registration. They tried to worm out of it along the lines of professional courtesy, but dad wasn't having it and issued the citation. Not long after, my mom gets pulled over for speeding at less than 5 over, and here's the officer on the radio confirming her identity. There's a price for principle, which is a shame. The only time I think I have ever pulled over encountered another law enforcement officer is traffic accident related. One accident I witnessed myself while investigating another accident. Roads were icy and we had about 5 accidents one after another. I watched this deputy cause the accident, mostly due to his bald tires. I cited him. I got called into a neighboring city to investigate a traffic accident where the cop was at fault. Had to cite him as well. That being said, I've been cited by other cops. Recently was driving to Vegas and a state trooper got me. I had a firearm on the console next to me and notified him. Let him know it was right there in view and I was a cop. He cited me for the full amount over just because I was a cop and should known better. One of our officers got arrested for DUI last year by our neighboring agency. Got arrested on a Friday, quit the following Tuesday. It boggles my mind how people think they're not at fault because of bad weather. Obviously you're going too fast for the conditions of you fear and the car in front of you. Created throwaway to answer this question. I have absolutely written tickets to other cops, and for several reasons. 1. They know better. 2. It's hypocritical. They're doing something they would write tickets for in their home jurisdiction. 3. It's disrespectful. When they flash a badge or something, they know they're asking me to make an ethical compromise. Now, if they're doing something that I would 50/50 give a warning for to an average person, they're vastly more likely to get a warning. Think 8/9 over. Cell phone. Same with dismissible offenses. For example, no driver license in possession. Something that would get dismissed by the court for anyone by law. But if it's something I would 100% write a ticket for, they're not going to get a warning instead. Some cops are very respectful and will only say something after the stop is done and over with. Some you can tell just because they act slightly out of the ordinary. For example, they'll address you properly. Trooper, deputy officer, put their hands on the wheel, roll all the windows down, etc. Some try to mention it on the sly. I have my off-duty weapon with me as a favorite. Others will literally hang their badge out the window as they come to a stop. I mean, really, this also happens with military. They hand their military ID over with driver license. Anyway, that's it. You can tell some gets a little salty when they realize they're getting a ticket, but none have argued, because there is absolutely nothing for them to stand on. My sister's a cop. She would give anyone a ticket if they were doing something stupid. Told me she gave a cop from a neighboring town a speeding ticket. He said, "What about professional courtesy?" She said, "That's what I was thinking. Professional courtesy would be not driving 65 in a 35 in the town where I work." I was issued a citation once. Coming home from vacation. 10-hour drive. I had been obeying all traffic laws, but when we hit my state and then my county, I felt safe and stepped on it. Lit up with blue lights almost 2 minutes later. I immediately noticed a second officer staying back by the vehicle. Since it's customary for officers in my area to have their own unit, I figured this guy was a trainee. He identified himself, his agency and reason for stop. I produced my driver's license, insurance and registration and politely informed him that I had a gun in the vehicle. He asked if I had a concealed license. I said no. That should have led him to ask me why I was carrying, and at that point I would have informed him I was an off-duty deputy sheriff. He didn't, just said okay and walked off. 10 minutes later he comes back with a citation. Asked me for my phone number to write in the citation and the name of my employer. So I said something county sheriff's office. I'm county 45. At this point he asked me why I didn't tell him I was a cop. I told him that it wasn't something I was allowed to do off the bat like that, and I wasn't playing that card. Took my citation and drove off. Got a call 2 minutes later from his FTO apologizing and asked me to pull over and wait on him. He voided the citation and apologized. Nothing for him to apologize for, but I did tell him he needed to address the whole "I have a gun" thing with his rookie. My grandmother was a police officer some time ago, and while not another officer, she ended up arresting a local government official. He had been drunk driving and crashed his car into multiple parked cars, street lights and finally a building, doing ridiculous amounts of damage, but he was able to walk away and right to jail. After she booked him, in 4-inch heels I might add, her superiors freaked the frick out and demanded she release him because of who he was. If I recall correctly, she told them they would have to do it themselves. Pretty sure all the charges were wiped and he went home that night. She quit shortly after the incident. Before that, she was in the Navy. After law enforcement she became a trauma nurse and now she's very happily retired. Haha. I have it on good authority that local law enforcement is specifically told to look the other way when govt officials around here are DUI. My wife is a trooper. She was driving to work one morning with the cruiser as she was double backing shifts. On the highway, a car comes flying up from behind her, then devices to pass her and a bunch of other cars at a speed high enough that she decides to pull them over. Never pass the highway pace car, kids. Guy pulls over. She does all the normal cop stuff, then gets out and starts walking up. She notices the guy hiding something out the window at her, walks closer and sees it's a badge. She acknowledged the guy, asks for license, registration, insurance, and he keeps pointing the badge at her. She asks again for his info. He shows her the badge harder, which just further annoyed her. She acknowledged the badge, asks again for his info. He finally relented and gave it over. She wrote him a ticket. He goes to work to his tiny local station and complains to his boss about the B trooper who pulled him over and gave him attitude. His boss calls her boss. Her boss sends his boss the recording of the stop. He is no longer an officer. I have a feeling his boss was looking for any reason to be rid of him, and is now a security guard at a hospital. I used to date a SSGMP and she said she ticketed her command sergeant major, top MP on the base, for speeding. He had an attitude during the stop but then called her into his office the next day and thanked her and said she did a good job. The only thing more powerful than a colonel is an A1C with an active cause due to the UCMJ to arrest the colonel. I had a SNCO flight chief get grumpy about this once. About the MNSPs telling him what he could and couldn't do. Don't mistake rank for authority, sir. I pulled over a red Corvette convertible with California plates for going almost 50 in a 30 mile per hour zone. I was a cop in Oregon. As I approached the Corvette, the driver flipped open his badge and showed it to me, not saying a word. I asked him for his driver's license. He looked down at his badge, not saying anything. I again asked for his license, and he asked me if I couldn't see his badge. I said that I could, and that I could also buy a badge off of eBay. He finally gave me his California driver's license. I gave him a ticket for speeding, and he complained and moaned and said he was gonna write my supervisors. He said this is why cops can't trust other cops. Never heard another word from the guy. I have no words other than WTF. I ticketed an air marshal one time, not a police officer, but still within the law enforcement community. He was going 65 in a 35. He was about to hit a 25 zone right by our elementary school and showed no signs of slowing down. I happened to be driving out to take a report, saw him flying into town and flipped on the radar. I was no longer working traffic at the time, but that was way too fast heading into town, so I flipped around and pulled him over. As I approached his convertible, the music was blaring. He did not bother to turn it down. When I instructed him to do so, he flashed his ID, as if that explained everything. He seemed shocked that I insisted he turn his music down and requested his driver's license and registration. He explained, while still holding up his ID, that he was a federal air marshal and did not have time to chit-chat. I smiled and informed him he should have thought about that before he went flying through town at 65 miles per hour. I added that he could speed the process up by providing me with the documentation I requested. After some grumping, he finally produced the information. I wrote him a ticket. The attitude cost him any chance at me taking it easy on him. If he was shocked when I made him give me his license and insurance, he was doubly shocked when I produced the ticket and told him his court date. Generally speaking, I hate giving traffic citations, but sometimes it can be enjoyable. I had a message waiting for me in a few hours when I swung back to fill out some paperwork. His supervisor had called and wanted to give me a chance to explain myself before he called the assistant chief to report my behavior. I offered to bring the chief, who was in the office that evening, onto the phone for him so we could discuss. He declined. After he dropped the huff and puff, we discussed the citation. I walked him through the traffic stop and the behavior of his subordinate. He apologized for wasting my time. He let slip this individual was a bit of a hothead, so the behavior was not totally surprising, though it was unacceptable. The air marshal called back the next day and apologized for his behavior in a voicemail. Then he showed up in court a month later to fight the citation. I mentioned to the city attorney that I still had his voicemail apology, which included him admitting he was driving way too fast. The city attorney passed that information along. He paid the ticket and we all went about the rest of our day. Similar sort of situation, but was not two cops. I went to college in a small town with one stoplight. This town had train tracks near that intersection. Apparently the trains were supposed to slow down while going through the town, but never did. One officer set a speed trap for the train and then followed through with citing the conductor with a speed violation. The railroad got the message after that and they did slow down. However, they would alert their slow presence by blowing the horn the entire way through the town, while obeying the speed regulation. Malicious compliance. As a teenager, I got pulled over for speeding but did not get a ticket. The cop looked at my license and asked me, "Do you know Jay so-and-so?" and I innocently said yes. "That is my dad." The cop says, "Well, as a courtesy, we don't give tickets to other cops or their families," and he let me go with a warning. My dad is not a cop. Turns out there is a cop in my city with my same last name, Jay so-and-so. My dad's name is Jim so-and-so. I got super lucky. My dad was pulled over for speeding when he was a San Bernardino County sheriff because he had to pee so bad. Because of the stop, he peed his pants in the cruiser. My second favorite story from my father. I know a physician in a big city. When she treats a cop, he'll give her his card with shivers, for example, written on the back. If she gets pulled over for a violation, she'll hand the card to the officer and drive away. The officer will take it into the station and claim his bottle of shivers from the cop who was treated in the air. That is to be bribing an officer, but I don't quite know how. I came to a road traffic accident involving a drunk driver driving a Mini. On my arrival, I found that the Mini wrapped around a tree and driver pee as a rat. As I approached him, he vomited and fell on the floor. From the lying position, he reached inside his jacket and drew out his police ID. He was a detective and he told me to pee off. I asked him to take a breathalyzer and to which he told me to frick off. So I arrested him and took him to the police station. I discovered that he was a detective chief superintendent. Well, he lost his job and screwed his life up. Tough crap. He should have thought of that before he decided to drink. Not a cop, but my grandfather was NYPD back in the 70s and got injured pretty severely while on duty. Well, my grandmother was leaving the hospital he was in and got pulled over for speeding. The officer asked where she was coming from and she subtly dropped that she was visiting her husband who was an officer and was injured. Cop basically tipped his hat, wished her a good day and my grandfather a recovery and immediately left. Leaving hospital is really a fine line. Going to hospital on the other hand, cops are known to give escorts to get through traffic etc. I'm an officer with a large department in CA. I hate writing tickets to anyone, let alone a cop, nurse, doctor, teacher or even clergy. I've written 12 tickets so far this year and I don't plan on writing many more. I will however conduct traffic stops on violators and give them the benefit of the doubt on most occasions. When I stop a vehicle I'm looking for criminal activity, not the opportunity to ruin someone's day with a piece of paper with a fine attached to it. These people are being salty about you giving people the benefit of the doubt, but if they were about to get a ticket and were let off with a warning they'd be singing your praise. My dad was a cop who get pulled over one night by highway patrol while he was off duty and he tried showing the guy his badge, but the highway patrolman grabbed it from him and threw it on the side of the road. Well, my dad was P and so were a lot of the other officers when they found out. So in retaliation, my dad's friend that next week pulled over a highway patrolman who was on his was to work in uniform and gave him a ticket. This started a massive feud between the police department and the highway patrol, to the point that the higher ups had to get involved and tell these grown butt men to grow up. LOL, being a cop back in the day sounded like it was a lot of fun. Those boys get that syrup in them. They get all antsy in their pantsy. I was a security guard and generally had no run-ins with police officers, but this one cop always parked in a handicap spot at the shopping center, did his grocery shopping, came back out, put his groceries in his squad car, and left. I always worked Saturdays and every single time he did this for 2 months. I started taking pics every time. I gave him 2 warnings as a courtesy, but he still did, so I finally gave him a $25 ticket. Next day I got a call from my supervisor complaining I ticketed a Leo, and I told him that it only was not applicable when they were responding to calls or doing patrols. This guy was shopping in his off time. Back and forth for a couple days till one day the cop showed up at the office and threatened to arrest me and my boss if I didn't take the fine off. I told him go ahead and try, I'll sue your butt. I called his boss and he got put on suspension. Apparently he used his gun to threaten over 20 people that week, on and off duty, and without justification. And my boss and I were just 2 of them. Never heard from him again or saw his car again. No one will probably see this deep into the post but sharing anyways. My dad is retired police. Before he retired, he was on his way to work when he noticed in his rear view a trooper coming up behind him like a bat out of heck, lights on and siren blazing. Just as any person would do, my father pulled into another lane to let the trooper pass. As soon as my father pulls into the other lane, the trooper slams on the brakes and proceeds to pull my dad over. The reason for pulling over my dad: he didn't use a turn signal when moving over to let the trooper pass. Now, if he had the time to pull my father over, he clearly wasn't in any true hurry and shouldn't be speeding, using sirens and lights. But I digress too much. Despite my father being in full uniform and explaining that he was getting out of the trooper's way as he was very obviously in a hurry, he still got a ticket for failure to use a turn signal. My dad contested and went to court. The trooper didn't show up nor did he file a report, so it was thrown out. Shortly after, my father learned that that specific trooper is nicknamed Trooper Diesel and is a notorious butthole, even among his police comrades. Not quite ticketing other Leo, but here you go. My husband renewed his registration for his car online and received a printout confirmation to carry on his car while the state mailed the paperwork and stickers. On his way to a construction site, a local cop ran his plates and pulled him over for a lapsed registration. My husband showed him the confirmation printout, but that wasn't good enough for this cop. He elected to have my husband's car impounded. My husband was less than a mile from his job site and begged to be allowed to just park it there so it would be off the road, but the cop really wanted to tow his car. While the car was being loaded up and towed, another police car showed up and an older local cop got out to assess the situation. He talks to the cop and then talks to my husband and takes a look at the printout. My husband also explained that he was very close to work and anxious about being late. The older cop then walked back to the younger officer and started screaming at him in front of everyone about how this whole thing was bulls and a complete waste of time and money. My husband said it wasn't like a raised voice either, it was a full-on red in the face, spitting fire and nails screaming. He forced the younger cop to apologize to my husband. He then apologized on behalf of the police department and said he would do his best to make it right. We still had to go to court for it, but they ruled in our favor. Our state uses those printouts for everything. My story involves an arrest of a high-rank officer's son. I pulled the car over for making a right turn on red. It was posted no turn on red. I pulled the car over. There were 3 teens in the car. 18. Driver. 17. Front passenger. 17. Rear passenger. I asked for his driver's license and noticed a bottle of booze on the floorboard on near the front passenger. Since they were all underage, I asked all occupants to exit the vehicle and detained the driver due to him claiming ownership of the alcohol. As I placed him in my patrol vehicle, he tells me his father was a lieutenant of a neighboring police department. So I asked for his father's phone number and told him that I would release him to his father if he came and picked him up. After the call, I searched the vehicle and underneath the driver's seat was a handgun, loaded, with one of the serial numbers filed away. I found another serial number and checked it. Stolen. So his father shows up and talks to me. I broke the news that his son was in possession of a stolen gun that happened to have an obliterated serial number. 2 major felonies. The fact there was a victim involved meant that I had to charge him with the crime. I called my supervisor out to the scene, which interrupted to a full-blown argument. Our hands were tied behind our back. So because of the incident, 2 of our officers were arrested for minor traffic violations and sent to jail. It was a stupid feud war that lasted a few months until the lieutenant resigned from his position when the chiefs got involved. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.